Okay, we'll call the meeting to order. Begin with a moment of silent prayer, but before we start, Supervisor Mahalik is not here. His mother had a heart issue, total blockage. She's in surgery now. If we could offer up prayers for her during our opening prayer. Pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, roll call. Supervisor McEwen is in traffic in Milwaukee. He was in court this morning all day. He will be here late. And go through the affidavit of posting. This is a meeting of the Washington County Board of Supervisors. Prior to this meeting, public notice was given by posting a copy of the agenda in the office of the county clerk and emailing the agenda to the West Bend Daily News, which is the official newspaper. In addition, the agenda was emailed to CNI newspapers, Express News, Kewaskum Statesman, Milwaukee Journal, Sentinel, WIBD, WMBZ Radio, and WTKM Radio. The above action is in conformity with the state of Wisconsin's open meeting law. I'd like to welcome the attendees from Common Sense Citizens of Washington County. Thanks for showing up. It's great to be able to have people in attendance with interest in what the county does. Thank you. Before we begin, I want to make a little announcement. Since 2013, the Washington County Board of Supervisors have contributed toward the Employee Appreciation Dinner in an effort to show our gratitude for the hard work that our county employees perform to serve our county residents. A relatively small contribution by each supervisor could turn out to be a real morale booster for the employees. This year, we're asking each supervisor to make a contribution of $100 to go towards the purchase of items to raffle off to the employees. Please contribute what you can, as this event and these gifts to our employees goes a long way in creating a positive working environment. Please indicate the amount you'd like to contribute. If you cannot contribute today, please bring a check to the January meeting, or you can send a check to Dennis Kelling, who will be handling it this year. And I would ask, if you don't have the cash or a check with you now, just give a notice, make a pledge as to how much you want to contribute, so that we can have a better idea of what we can go shopping for the employees. Thank you. We have before us a consent agenda. I'll entertain a motion to accept the consent. Schleif, Samisek. Got it. Finally. Any changes? Any other further discussion? Supervisor Merton.
Could you explain or give some background about this Mark Waters for the Civil Service Commission?
I'll let Josh handle that one.
If my memory serves, it's a reappointment, right? He's currently appointed, so it's just re-upping.
He's a current member. Where's he from?
I can't remember off the top of my head. If they're reappointments, they aren't reviewed at all. They just come right back up.
I didn't remember the name. Thank you.
Sorry.
Okay, hearing no other, we'll vote, show of hands. All in favor, signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Okay, moving on to personal appearances, letters and other communications. WAL Workforce Development Board Incorporated Annual Update. Laura Catherman. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. Can you hear me okay? All right, excellent. So my name is Laura Catherman. I'm the Director of the Workforce Development Board for Waukesha, Ozaukee, and Washington counties. A lot of familiar faces here tonight and some news, so I'll do a little bit of who we are, and then I'll get into our performance metrics and just some general updates and labor market information as we look into the future. So So we, as a workforce board, were created by federal legislation. The legislation that governs us is called the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, or WIOA, as we affectionately call it. It's changed names a number of times over recent years. This most recent name was done in 2015 when they reauthorized the existing legislation. We work in collaboration with our local elected officials, mostly county governments, so in our 3 counties. And we also work with economic development organizations, businesses, and the education community to address immediate and long-term workforce needs. So it's a little bit hard to read up on the screen, but hopefully you can see it in a handout. Our membership is pretty wide-ranging. We have a mix of private sector employers that make up the majority of the board, and we also have public sector representation as well, from economic development, education, and Department of Workforce Development, just to name a few. Our board chair is actually from Washington County, John Heyer of Kettle Marine Coatings in Jackson. What's not on this slide is we have a committee that involves our county local elected officials, so Supervisor Chris Diaz and also Chairman Kreifall serve on that for Washington County. We are one of 11 workforce boards in Wisconsin, and we are also one of about 600 across the country. So we have a great network of peers. We work together on regional and statewide issues, and it helps us learn about best practices going on throughout the state that we can bring back into our 3-county area. The board underwent some strategic planning about 3 years ago, and we came up with 5 strategic goals that we were going to focus on over the long run. So we're getting ready to renew this and look at it again in 2019. But currently, what our 5 strategic goals are as a board are to strengthen the talent pipeline with Milwaukee in the existing area. So we know there's a labor shortage, and when we look at the numbers of job openings and people that are ready to fill those jobs, we have a bit of a mismatch in our 3-county area. And so we're really looking at taking a regional approach to the labor shed so we can make sure we have enough qualified workers to fill the jobs in our 3 counties. The second is ensuring that our board has sufficient resources. So we are federally funded entirely. We also look at other grant opportunities to make sure we're bringing in the resources for all things training and employment to help our business community and our job seekers. The third is identifying the priorities of our local business community. We want to make sure what we're doing as a board is demand driven. So we rely on the business community, our board members, to really inform those decisions. So when we invest in training programs, we want to make sure we're investing in programs that are going to result in demand driven jobs. The fourth is identifying the needs of our job seekers. And so this is learning what is important to our customers and making sure we're delivering services in a manner that's consistent with that. So an example might be we go out into the community and deliver services at libraries as opposed to making everybody come to our center at Marine Park. And lastly, it's facilitating creative approaches to macro workforce issues. And so we have a big issue now, which is the labor shortage. I think we probably read about it in the paper on a daily or weekly basis, and so that's our big macro issue that we're working to solve right now. So just a quick overview of some of the programs and services that we offer. Because my time is limited, I won't go into great detail on these, but our 2 primary customers are the job seeker and the business. And so for the job seeker programs, we serve adults, which is really, and anybody that wants to come into the center, we can serve them. There is some eligibility for specific services, but the centers are open to anyone in the general public. Dislocated workers, so anyone that's been laid off from a job, youth, and then our rapid response program are for those large dislocations. So when you read in the paper about Bonton, for example, that closes, we will go in and do a rapid response where we'll work on getting the workers that were laid off quicker into reemployment. On our business services side, we have hiring assistants for companies that can assist with job descriptions, job postings, anything that a business would need to help them hire the workforce that they need to be successful. We also offer work experiences and internships. So we help match job seekers to the businesses and can help offset the cost for a business to bring on an intern or a job seeker. And it really helps build the resume for people with limited work experience or maybe who've been out of the workforce for quite some time. We have on-the-job training services, which is a program that allows a business to hire someone who has the aptitude for the job, but not the specific skill set. And so we can help fund the training to get their technical skills up to speed. And then incumbent worker training, which is similar, but it's for incumbent workers or existing workers, so we can help offset that cost to train your existing workforce so they can be retained and upskilled to be successful in the workplace. We also offer rapid response services for the business community as well. So when a business is laying off, we'll go in and talk to a business about what services are available to help ease in that transition, to help with those affected employees. We are measured by a number of performance metrics by the legislation that governs us. And so these are consistent across all of the federal workforce programs, and these were new under the most recent legislative change. So for the adult and dislocated worker program, we measure how many individuals are employed the second quarter after they leave us, so 6 months after, and then 1 year later. So we want to look at retention. If someone leaves us in a year, were they retained in that same job? Did they change jobs, or are they now unemployed? For youth, we look at education and employment. What we often see in youth is there's two distinct pathways. Some are looking for post-secondary education before employment, and some are going directly to employment. So we measure both for youth. We measure median earnings across all of our programs, credential attainment rates, and measurable skills gain. And a new measure for the workforce boards is effectiveness in serving employers. So we've always served employers, but there wasn't a federal measure on that. And so now we're measuring how many are we serving. So we survey how many businesses are there in the 3-county area and how many of them are we actually touching. And then how many are coming back to work with us. And so that's really going to measure the satisfaction. So if we see a high repeat customer rate, we know that we're doing things well. So I'm happy to report for the 4th year as a workforce board, we've exceeded all of our performance metrics. The standards are set by the State Department of Workforce Development, so we're given targets for each of those metrics. So we have had a history of strong performance and continue to do so, and that really speaks to the quality of the staff and the relationships that we've built in the communities. In the last program year, which is a July 1 through June 30th program year, we served a little over 1,000 clients in our programs. And of those, 513 are currently in in-demand occupations. And those that are not are either in training or are in job search. The median wage across all of our programs is $14.85 an hour. And as you'll see on subsequent slides, that number varies greatly from the youth program to the dislocated worker program. And we served 571 businesses with their hiring needs. So this is broken down in some of our specific programs. The dislocated worker program served almost 300 clients last year with a median wage of $21.75 an hour. So we often see a higher wage in that program because those individuals are coming with a high skill set and a lot of work experience. And you can contrast that against our youth program. We had 201 clients served with a median wage of $11.84 an hour. So a lot of the youth are in their first job, or maybe they've done an internship and this is their second job. So there is a difference. The other programs, I won't go into every number just for the sake of time, but we did work with 12 businesses with rapid response services in the last year. So 12 businesses that had a mass layoff or a closing in the 3-county area in a 12-month period. We also worked with 16 businesses for incumbent worker training and 53 businesses for on-the-job training. We hold 3 job fairs on an annual basis. 2 are in Waukesha County and 1 is here in West Bend. The job fairs continue to be hugely popular, and what we do see is often trending with the unemployment rate. The job seeker number has been lower in recent years because the unemployment rate is down. There's fewer people that are out in the market looking for work. So that's consistent, and we tend to see that number trend with the unemployment rate. We also held 14 on-site recruitments for various businesses, and we held workforce seminars throughout the 3 counties to educate businesses on things like labor laws, HR best practice, talent attraction and retention, and 64 businesses attended those. So we are a proud partner of the American Job Center Network. This is a new national branding standard that's applied to the workforce development centers or the one-stop system. So you might be most familiar with our center at Moraine Park in West Bend. You'll start to see this American Job Center co-branding. And that's really to help unify the system across the country and apply that. So if you're in any state, you can recognize an American Job Center and know the types of services that you can receive. So we have 3 centers in the WOW area. The one in West Bend, we have 1 at WCTC in Pewaukee, and 1 at MATC in Mequon. At the centers, it's really a combination of partners that work there to deliver the services in tandem to make it a one-stop shop. And so some of those partners include the Wisconsin Department of Workforce Development, our 3 technical college partners, Workforce Development Inc., who is a service provider for the board, ResCare, who is also a service provider, and others as well. So we recently celebrated 15 years at the center in West Bend, and our customer satisfaction rate continues to be strong. So we tend to trend in the 90s when we look at customer service. This last year we had 94%, which really, again, speaks to the quality of the staff and the services that they're delivering. And the centers in the last calendar year had 33,000 visits. So you'll see as we're looking at the performance of the system in 2018, we are on track to be slightly less in terms of number of visits from the prior year. Again, that's really consistent with the unemployment rate and the labor market and where things are at. But either way, 33,000 visits in 1 year is no small feat. So additional areas of focus for the boards, we look beyond the performance metrics and some of the specific program requirements to look at some of those macro issues that are affecting our community. So the labor shortage is at the top of that list, followed by talent attraction and retention. That's becoming more and more, popular in terms of ways that we're going to address the talent shortage. So we've partnered and we work with regional organizations on some talent attraction initiatives. We work on retention issues. So for companies, we know that it's often easier to retain employees, so we can help with training them rather than having to always seek new employees. So we try to balance that out. We work on developing job-ready talent, so we train on soft skills, and we work with our partners to train on technical skills. We've increased our regional and local collaborations and partnerships. This is a big issue, and we know that we're not in this alone, and so we look at our partners. There are a lot of great organizations that are doing some great things, and so as a board, we want to work with them to figure out how we can support that and really grow the impact. So I'm going to switch focus to labor market information. Unemployment rate by county, I'll just summarize for those of you who maybe can't see it in the back. Washington County is at 2.3%. This was as of September, that was the most recent rates. Light blue is similar, so most of Wisconsin is in the same position that we are in here in the WOW area. The unemployment rate in Wisconsin across the board is historically low, and the next slide really illustrates that. This is the unemployment rate trend going back to 1990. The gray shaded bars show recessions. So you can see the 2008 to 2009, that large gray shaded bar was when we had our most recent recession. So you can see the sharp increase that occurred in that very brief period, and then how long it's taken to get back to where we are now. So Washington County is the purple line, which is right below the green line, which is the state of Wisconsin. The Wisconsin Department of Workforce Development provides labor market information for us, and they also do projections. So when we're looking out 10 years, well now it's 8 years actually, we look out to 2026 and we see where the largest number of jobs are going to be based on the projections. Education and health services, with I think an emphasis on health services really being the dominant sector in terms of where the projected jobs are looking. Trade, transportation, and utilities is close behind, followed by manufacturing. We know there's demand in all industries. This is just showing total employment. When we look at the WOW area, our numbers are very similar in terms of Wisconsin. Our top is also education and health services, followed by professional and business services, and then trade, transportation, and utilities. So one thing that you don't see in this chart, this is showing total jobs. This is not showing job openings due to retirements. So that certainly will impact those numbers quite a bit. This, I realize, is very hard to see from far away, but I'll summarize for you. When we're looking at specific occupations, long-term, Wisconsin has broken down how many jobs are going to be created by job growth, how many will be open due to individuals transferring to other occupations or to other companies, and how many will be left as a result of retirement. So the green bar is retirements, the blue bar is transfers, and the orange bar is growth. So we're seeing huge numbers, but most of them are in that transfer and retirement category. So all things that are consistent with what we've been hearing for the last couple of years regarding the labor market. This is just illustrating it in a little bit of a different way. Wisconsin also defines what they call hot jobs. And so this is jobs that pay above the median state wage. The percentage of projected growth must be higher than average, and they also must have the most projected openings. So at the time of this report, when we pulled what were the top 10 hot jobs by that definition, the heavy or tractor trailer truck drivers is at the top of that list. So we know transportation industry is having a huge need for talented CDL and skilled truck drivers. So that is consistent here, followed by data representatives, registered nurses. The industries that we're hearing about, the data is really validating that there is a need in those areas. So that is is it for me. I'd be happy to answer any questions that you may have about the labor market information or any other performance of the board.
Supervisor Kelly?
Quick question, do you have the data for the truck driving, what the median income is for those?
I don't have it offhand. And I-
You can get it to me, that's
I
fine, I was just
can.
wondering, you do keep that information?
Yeah, the state has that.
Great,
Mhm.
thank you.
Supervisor Bullough?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Do you reach out to the high schools for those children who decide not to go on to, a formal 2-year or 4-year program? And then, if you do, can you describe what it is you present to them?
Sure. So we have career planners that are the individuals that work with the job seekers, and so they are often the individuals that are reaching out to the high schools and going to talk to counselors most often. It looks a little bit different in every school system, but it is providing information on the projected growth for in-demand jobs and the technical skills and training that is needed. We've recently started working with the Washington County Workforce Alliance, and so I think the relationship with K-12 will continue to grow and evolve. It is specific to the individual's needs. So if an individual comes to us and says, I want to go to school to become a nurse, then we provide information on the career pathways about how to do that.
So do you talk with the counselors then, or with the students?
With both, it just is really school specific. We had a change in legislation a few years ago where most of our youth focus was on high school aged youth. And the legislation that changed in 2015 and 16 made the focus on what they called out-of-school youth. So 18 to 24-year-olds who either did not complete high school or completed but have not chosen a path. So when that changed, our focus with the K-12 system changed as well.
Okay, thank you.
Supervisor Mary?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A question regarding your job fairs that you had. Do you have any kind of a comparative on the demographic for, say, the last 3 years? How has that changed?
We have information on the total numbers. We don't collect a lot of specific demographic information, but certainly the number of job seekers attending has trended downward with the unemployment rate. I don't have them in front of me, but I'd be happy to share what we have collected. We certainly ask about educational status and job status, so we can see who's coming that's looking for a job, who maybe already has one and wants to see what's out there. We often see a mix in terms of age groups, but we do have some data that I'd be happy to share.
Thank you.
Supervisor Galitz?
Thank you. Similar to Supervisor Ball's question or comment regarding influencing high school or even grade school students about careers and recent disturbing trends of students avoiding skilled trades as well as other technical, highly technical type skills. Are we partnering, or is WOW partnering with area businesses to be on advisory boards for schools, for, what do they call those, school to work programs in high schools, apprenticeships, all that?
Yeah, so we have done a lot of work with youth apprenticeships and adult apprenticeships. Our role has been in awareness in those aspects, so it's more about the opportunities that come with apprenticeships and the skilled trades. We've had different educational events, and we've partnered with chambers and other groups that have done those career awareness events. So the Workforce Alliance, for example, has done that, and so we've partnered in those cases. But yes, that is certainly something that's top of mind to our employer community, and that we
Supervisor Bossert?
Okay, I think we're all seeing a lot of the same things because Supervisor Bullough and Supervisor Galitz were both in the realm of what I'm looking at here too. When I look at the list of 10 high-demand occupations, 6 of those are ones that your most likely avenue to get the skills you need would be Marine Park rather than a 4-year college. So my question was going to be along their lines. So having that answered already, I'm going to encourage you to continue to look for more ways to make sure, especially our high school youth, see that that's where the opportunities lie right now and not in getting a 4-year philosophy degree.
yes.
All right, thank you.
And I will just add, when you look at the training that the board funds, every year we look at the in-demand occupations and the board determines what training programs they will fund. A lot of the training funds go to the technical colleges for 2-year or shorter training programs.
Supervisor Sorcy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've been saying this for the last 4 or 5 years or so, but they still don't have a tracking system to track the people who are off the radar screen. Will they ever come up with something like that, or?
I've been ready for your question the last couple of years, but unfortunately, I don't believe, and I'm not on the inside of those conversations.
No, I'm not blaming you, but I'm just saying, I've been saying this for a while. You think
I
that
know.
somebody would come up and say, well, actually, there's this many people that are still out of work?
It's hard to track. There are different estimates as to what the real number is, but nothing
right.
that I can quote, I should say.
All right, thank you.
Well, I just have some comments.
Yes.
I love it that, being on the board, you guys results driven, and you guys aren't afraid to step out and try new things, very innovative. One of the things I've always talked about with the 2-year degrees and getting into the workforce, you go through your 4-year degree, which typically takes 5.5 to 6 years. You build up debt. You come back home, you can't find that job. You end up in your parents' basement. Where you take your 2-year degree, you can get into the workforce, make really good money to begin with. You don't have the debt, and you can start becoming a productive citizen much earlier. And it's a very honorable profession to be any of the trades or in manufacturing. So and that's kind of that stigma that still is attached to manufacturing and trades. And I'd like to see more and better advertising from some of our MPTCs and MATCs to get them to show that difference, to show that that you can really get a good, better start at life. So, but thank you for what you do.
Thank you, appreciate it.
Thanks. Okay, next on the agenda is strategic priorities for 2017 to 2019 update, and that'll be Supervisor Shaman.
All right, so tonight I wanted to give you an update on the strategic priorities. For those of you who've been on the board for more than this current term, you'll know that this was adopted back in April of 2017, and most of you were a part of that process. Paul Roebuck from UW Extension is here with us tonight, and he was integral in helping us create that strategic priorities document. This is intended to be an update. That document was adopted in, I believe it was April 27th of 2017. And so we've got a few more months to kind of wind down, finish out a few of the things that were on that list 2 years ago. And then in the next couple of months, we'll be ramping up and getting going for the next 2 years. If you notice the timing of these things, for those of you who are brand new, you've now been here for just over 6 months. You've got your feet wet, you've been through a budget, kind of a feel for where the bathrooms are and maybe where an office or two might be. And so now you're going to go through a very similar process. Now that we've got you oriented, we'll take the whole board through a very similar process to develop strategic priorities for 2019 through 2021. And we've already begun that discussion, which generally in the last few times at least has started with the executive committee, and then it'll come individually to you and ultimately through the county board. But to give you an update on the last few priorities, for the last couple of years I should say, each one of these is broken down when you look at the actual document that was adopted and implemented and we've been working off of into two pieces. First, there was kind of a background issue. I won't go through that with you today, but certainly if you're interested in a copy, I know the new supervisors were given that information in paper packet format when the county did the orientation meeting back earlier this spring. And the other half of things is a SMART goal or a measurable goal, an objective, depending on your industry, that kind of lays out a timeline when we're supposed to hit expectations, what those expectations are specifically, and what is the outcome that we're desiring. So that's attached to each one of these items, and I'll be reporting on it today. In terms of a reporting procedure, over the last 2 years, there's a semi-regular check-in with executive on the status of each one of these. You'll notice that a lot of the goals actually have reporting requirements to individual standing committees. So depending on subject matter, for example, the Parks Fiscal Sustainability Plan, if you're on the Public Works Committee, you may be getting frequent updates on that. If you're not on that committee, you maybe haven't heard about it for months at a time. The same thing might be true for something like, you'll see in a few minutes, a Satellite Resource Office. If you were on the Health and Human Services Committee, you might have heard about that in the not too distant past. If you're not on that committee, you may not have heard about it for months. But executive committee is getting a relatively frequent update, largely because these strategic priorities serve then as my goals as county administrator. So they've been involved throughout the process. You're going to see in some cases they change timelines, they make recommendations. And again, as I mentioned a few moments ago, they help formulate strategic priorities before we jump into discussions as a county board as a whole. My philosophy on how we utilize these, when I was hired back in late 2013, I began in early 2014, we had a document that wasn't all that different from the one you see now, except by the time I had been here, it was getting close to 2 years old, and we really hadn't done anything on that list. So the way that I've handled these is, in essence, I keep the list. I stay on top of departments, making sure that that we work through them. But I'm not real strict with what the timelines or the deadlines are. I'm more worried about, are they going to get done? Are we going to get them done on time? The way that the goals are written are flexible. Things change, times change, issues change. But generally speaking, are we meeting the intent of that goal or the strategic priority that you set? And you'll see that as we go through. Each one of the strategic priorities is listed on the left, and we'll go through all of them as you will see. But then they're categorized by the results or the individual priority areas of the county. And so we start with access to basic physical, behavioral, and socioeconomic needs, which per your request in the not too distant future, we will soon change to access to basic needs. To make it a little bit easier. But as you can see on the left, there were 3 strategic priorities in this particular result. A juvenile detention services goal. Initially, this goal was recommended to me to postpone by executive committee back in November of 2017. On his own, Sheriff Schmidt decided that he was going to write a white paper, and he reported back in August of this year to the Public Safety Committee, and basically that white paper stated that this is something that a number of stakeholders should be pulled together and have a discussion about, which also interestingly was pretty much what the goal said. Protective placement, safety and feasibility plan. This is another issue right now. This is when you have heard, some of you in Health and Human Services have heard a lot of talk about Chapter 55 placements or Chapter 51 placements. That's really what's being talked about with this goal, developing, in this case, a white paper with some strategies for how to improve that over the coming years. That white paper is planned to be presented no later than April, this coming April, to the Health and Human Services Committee. More than likely, what will come out of that white paper are some recommendations for implementation in 2019, 20, and 21. Some of those might be things you consider in future strategic priorities, and some might not. The last one in this particular result is a Satellite County Resource Office. For those of you who don't know, we have a resource office in the city of Hartford across from the hospital. We rent some space or utilize some space with the United Way Resource Center there. And we've utilized it somewhat casually, I would say, over the last several years. WIC has hosted some hours there. The ADRC has kind of casually hosted some hours there. And this particular goal was intended to see if, should we utilize that space more? Is there an interest? Is it worth the money? And you'll see in January, the Health and Human Services Committee is going to get a report, kind of an update on where that's at. what recommendations there are. And some of you also might have seen recently that the county clerk's office and Ashley have decided to host some office hours there to try and do some different things and see what kind of reception they get. And again, that'll be reported at the Human Services Committee. The next result is economic growth and vitality. There were two specific strategic priorities here. The first one is the revolving loan fund double down. You'll remember that we brought a resolution to the county board back in March of this year, kind of laying out the framework of what an agreement might look like. It took us 9 months and a number of meetings and probably more attorneys than we'd like to talk about, but we finally got an agreement done. Is ink dry on the agreement?
The agreement is complete. We expect signatures this week.
Okay.
They were going to
So-
come this morning but couldn't make it. So.
Okay, all right, so by the end of this week, I believe we'll have ink on those, and certainly by the end of the year. That agreement is set to start officially January 1st of 2019. So as I've told you in the past, including in my State of the County address, that's something you should be very proud of. It's very, very innovative and something we're looking forward to. The Parks Fiscal Sustainability Plan, certainly this one you've heard a lot about. Public Works Committee has probably heard about it all the way up to their nose. And I know Jamie's been back here on a number of different occasions giving you updates and updating the plan itself. I note there a couple of things that happened, including some approvals, and we continue to work and improve that particular plan. Effective mobility and reliable infrastructure. Another few strategic priorities here. Some of them you'll be familiar with, others maybe not quite so familiar with. So the first is the Transportation Network Sustainability Plan. Again, another one of those things that we're leading the state of Wisconsin in, solving the Just Fix It campaign for ourselves locally with that resolution that you approved back in earlier this year. The Bike and Pedestrian Plan, some of you are involved in this, and the work continues. You can see at the very bottom of that particular strategic priority, that last bullet, we're including a number of projects in the upcoming CIP. That'll be coming to Public Works Committee here shortly, and then to the County Board next, probably the beginning of the second quarter of next year. The plan itself is in process. I believe there was a map that was revealed yesterday, if I'm not mistaken, at the Route to the Badger meeting. So the pieces are slowly getting put together. Deb Silsky and Jamie and the team will be presenting on that and getting final approval no later than April of 2019. Regional transit partnerships. This is one that never quite made it up to the board. The goal was achieved. We hosted a joint meeting of the Public Works Committees in Ozaukee and Washington County. I guess it was all the way back in May of 17, so I misspoke. It was not May of 18, it was May of 17. I misspoke at the Public Works Committee this afternoon. That committee meeting resulted in kind of the worst of all scenarios for staff, 2 tie votes, which nobody knows what that ever really actually means. And so we literally just talked an hour and a half ago with the Public Works Committee as there's a transition in staffing and transit for Washington County. You'll be considering a component of that here in a few minutes. And so that gives us an opportunity to take a look at this again here in the next few months and into 2019. Safe and secure community result. There's 3 strategic priorities here to update you on. The first one, opioid epidemic best practices. There was a lot of discussion at the roundtables when we had this back in 2017. You might remember that there was a conscious decision by the board not to set a specific goal because this is such an expansive issue. But there have been a few things that you've done in the last 2 years that I think are notable. One is the opioid TAD program was adopted in May of 2017. Certainly something that we're doing to resolve this issue and to be proud of. There may be, in the not too distant future, some new thoughts and ideas that come out of that, that you may hear about soon. And then, of course, while controversial, certainly something that contributes. In November of 2017, when you decided to become part of the large litigation process that's happening and continues to play out via resolution at that time. Next is traffic safety analysis. This is taking a look at county road intersections throughout the county. Scott Schmidt and his team are actually working on this as we speak. The plan is to make a presentation, I believe in December. I'm sorry, I miswrote it there. It's in January to the Public Works Committee with the results of that analysis. This was something that Scott, and as well as the GIS team and the Sheriff's Department have worked together to formulate, and will be presented here pretty quick. Finally, the crime data identification and resource needs. This was something that was postponed by Executive Committee back in November of 2017. I can tell you that I have talked with Sheriff-elect Schulteis about this particular goal and asked him if this was something that he and I would be able to work on as he begins his tenure as sheriff in Washington County. And he's interested in talking more about that possibility. So this likely will be something we'll come back and talk to you about maybe for the next round of strategic priorities. Next is well-governed and administered county. First, performance-based management. At Executive Committee back in September, there was a report from Matt Furno, our Deputy County Administrator, Eric Damcott, and Aaron Dahl, thank you very much, who at the time was in our Finance Department and is now in our Human Resources Department. And they're putting together performance-based management. This is going to result in individual dashboards for measuring outcomes in each department. Largely that tie to the results, although not always directly, but come to you at the committee level and are reporting on a frequent basis. In some cases that might be monthly, in other cases it might be quarterly. But the idea is to be coming back to the committee and reporting on the outcomes that are being produced, that you've identified through the result maps. Next is the compensation plan. I came to you back in July and presented on the concept for the compensation plan. We've been working with the administrative committee on this. We're currently in the implementation stages. I believe we signed a contract with we have not yet signed a contract with the vendor, but we're getting close. I know that's being reviewed. The timelines are being put in place. That is going to be adopted and implemented for January 1st of 2020. You remember I talked a lot about evaluations and how important staff felt having a good evaluation model was to our new compensation model. That contract is signed. We are working with a vendor on a software program to change our evaluation model. That's happening as we speak. I want to say is it Todd in here? April implementation, April 2019? And so we'll continue to report back to the administrative committee on that as well. Communication plan. You've been very involved with this as well. Executive committee adopted the actual plan itself back in May. You've seen a number of things from this. The fiscal health presentation all of you have seen. We presented that to over 1,000 folks over the last couple of years. And then the branding initiative, which we talked about last month, as well as the vision, mission, and values, which we've presented on in the past as well. Finally, a couple of goals that didn't fall under a result, but were things that were highly identified by the county board back in 2017. Shared services, as well as developing fiscal independence plans for the non-governmental or quasi-governmental groups we work with. First, the shared services. I only listed 3. We probably could have listed about 6 or 7. The biggest ones are probably the 7-party jurisdictional transfer. That was quite large. I put County Highway C under Newburgh. That should be County Highway MY with the Village of Newburgh. And then the on-site clinic with the City of West Bend. All 3 of those things happened in the last 2 years. And then the quasi-governmental fiscal independence plans, I already talked about EDWCs. I can tell you, I can report to you today that I met with some of the consultants working with the Washington County Historical Society or the History Center just last week. And they are doing their due diligence and working on developing what their plan might look like. They'll be coming back to that ad hoc committee. It looks like right now in the month of January to present their concept, which would ultimately come to the board in the form of a resolution. So that ends 2017 to 2019, tells you where we're at and how we're closing out the last few items there. The 2019 to 2021 process, we're still finishing up the formulation of this, but here's a few of the things that we're considering. The model that we used last time, we felt worked well, and the goals and priorities that we've listed, we feel like were achievable and now have been reportable. So we've had a running list of ongoing suggestions and initiatives that we kind of keep going over the course of years. Most of those things come up in meetings like this or in committee meetings. Last month, and then going into the month of December here, we try to organize those with executive committee, narrow them down from 20 to 25 down to something a little bit more manageable, like 15 to 20. We're also going to take the results from the comprehensive plan. You'll remember a few months back, after a meeting here, we went across the hall and developed a number of kind of brainstorming initiatives that you talked through. We're going to take some of the results from that, further try to hone in on exactly what we want to accomplish in the next 2 years, and include that, and further narrow it with executive committee. And then we're considering right now, and I'd be interested in your feedback, hosting one-on-one meetings between myself and you as county board supervisors. We've done that in the past after an election to try and get everybody oriented and start the new session off. It takes a lot of time and effort. I know it takes time for out of your schedules. It takes a lot of time for my staff and I to make happen. But it's something we're interested in potentially doing if you're interested in it. Also then, kind of the next step would be facilitating final selection. It would be very similar to what we've done in the past. Going on a board retreat, kind of doing the round table type of thing, moving table from table, and trying to kind of winnow down from that 20-ish number down to maybe about a dozen or so. And then ultimately seeking final approval through executive committee and ultimately county board. The goal would be to have everything ready and implemented by right around that April or May timeframe. So we kind of stay on the same schedule where there's an election in the even-numbered years, and we're kind of kicking off the next round of strategic priorities April of the odd-numbered years, and then that cycle can keep going. So with that, I would take your questions, any feedback you have on that process, or where we're at with any of the goals.
Supervisor Bosser.
Okay, on the effective mobility and reliable infrastructure, looking at regional transit partnerships, is that specifically shared ride taxi programs, right?
In the particular case of that meeting, it had been.
Okay,
The goal and the discussions at comprehensive planning have been way more broad than that.
okay, looking at the road system and everything, eh? Yep.
Not trains.
Right. Very,
But yes.
Okay.
Not the road system, really, the shared ride taxi and the commuter express. Were both
Okay.
talked about
Yeah.
at the comprehensive planning meeting.
yeah,
But this meeting of the joint meeting,
Yeah.
that was really honed in on shared ride taxi.
okay, so you think there's a strong possibility that we're gonna be able to work with Ozaki on shared ride taxi consolidation?
So the direction, or I should say the consensus from Public Works tonight, with that transition in our transit position, was to reach out to Ozaki and start a discussion.
Okay,
Let's see where it goes first.
and am I seeing here that West Bend doesn't have any interest right now? Or is it that we don't have any interest in working with West Bend?
We have interest.
Okay, good.
I don't, we didn't feel, and that's probably the safest way to sense it. My instinct was there was an interest, there was a mutual interest.
Okay,
At least, and that was not a city council or a committee meeting, that was a staff meeting. And I echoed at the committee today that the way that the cities operate their taxi services, both Hartford and the city of West Bend, is substantially different than the way the county operates. And I think that's part of the hesitation. We have a 24-hour scheduling where you have to call in 24 hours ahead of time. They're on demand per se. We drop off at the curb and they do at the door. Is that correct? We do door, they do curb, other way around. So there's, I think that's where the concerns begin at least.
yeah, I think long-term, those are redundant services. So I think we need to find the will to find how we can bridge those gaps and start combining these services and eliminating that redundancy.
The good news is you've got a city councilor 2 seats from you
Yep,
and 4 seats past that.
yep.
Supervisor Carr.
I had the occasion not too long ago to use our shared ride services, which I found very interesting. But in the process, I was talking to the driver. We were in the vicinity of Cedar Community. And I said, by the way, how much business do we get from Cedar Community? Oh, an enormous amount. Most of my rides are the Cedar Community folks. They use it all the time. Well, one of the problems that we have, and I speak not only as a county supervisor, but as a town of West Bend supervisor, is that the Cedar Community pays essentially no taxes. They are a religious-based organization, and they pay virtually no property taxes. They pay a few $1,000s a year based upon the amount of the land that they have that they don't use that's agriculturally zoned. So we may want to consider the fact that since all the taxpayers of Washington County are subsidizing this fine service, and yet a big proportion of it is being used by the folks at Cedar Community who aren't subsidizing it through taxes, that we may want to initiate some sort of a program to approach them and see if we can figure out a way to get some kind of a contribution from Cedar Community. We've got well over 400 people that live out there, and they're talking about expanding it. So I would encourage the Transportation Committee, or whoever this falls under, to take that under advisement and see if we can't work out some kind of a deal with them to get some kind of a contribution from those worthy folks out there to help us all out. Thank you.
Any other questions? Supervisor Gauss.
Thank you. Regarding the well-governed administrative county, the health clinic itself, so do we keep metrics on usage? Specifically, is it, if it was an objective to change consumer behavior on healthcare, you know, going to a clinic or walk-in versus a ER to save, you know, the county money, are we tracking those metrics? I wasn't here when that was set up.
Sure. Yeah, great question. So first, the clinic's been open for not quite 18 months yet. So the data's still pretty new. The answer to your question is yes. The administrative committee has received some of those updates, and I think once we have more consistent data, there will be more of those updates. Part of the goal, part of the challenge, of course, of having the shared services, now we've got to parse the data between the two. But yes, that is something that we do have and does get reported back to administrative committee.
So is it meeting our goals?
It's meeting the goals that we expected it to meet at this point in its life cycle. So the first year, basically just kind of getting it up and running and getting people in and out of the door. We've hit the, kind of the benchmark for where we thought we would be. I think we've got plenty of room to improve, which means we have plenty of room to save money. But so far, so good.
Thank you.
Okay, any other questions? Thanks, Josh. Moving on to resolutions and ordinance. 2018 Resolution 42, transfer from the general fund, state community development block grant involving a loan fund and authorized participation in state's CDBG closeout program.
So rather than be redundant, I'm not going to ask you to postpone this another month, but I am going to ask you to refer it back to executive committee. The HUD has actually approved the request from the Department of Administration, but it happened yesterday, so we don't know exactly what that means. So my request is that someone make a motion to refer it back to executive, let them figure out the details, and then send it back as is appropriate.
Supervisor Kelling, second by Supervisor Mary. Supervisor Schleif?
Since executive meets next Tuesday, is that enough time to figure out the details so that we can effectively deal with it?
I literally saw the email at about 8 o'clock last night and haven't had a chance to talk to Christian, so I don't know the answer yet. But if it's possible for us to get it on that agenda, we will.
Thank you.
Okay, we have a motion and a second to refer back to committee. Is this a electronic or hands only?
Electronic.
Okay, we'll vote on this electronically then if there's no other questions. Motion passes 25-0 to refer back to committee. Excuse me. Resolution 2018, Resolution 58, relocation order, County Trunk Highway M Bridge over the Milwaukee River. Motion by Supervisor Bolowa, second by Supervisor Gonring. Supervisor Merton.
I just have a question on the funding. It says 20% by us or the county, or is any bridge aid used on that particular item? It's a county highway crossing the bridge, correct?
Yes,
So we shouldn't be using county bridge aid?
correct,
So we aren't?
correct.
Oh, thank you.
Yes.
Okay, any further questions? Again, vote on this electronically. All in favor, would be aye. Resolution passes 25-0. 2018 Resolution 59, relocation order, County Trunk Highway D, Nano Road to the Canadian National Railway. Supervisor Krebs, Supervisor Sarcee. Any discussion? Seeing none, we'll vote on this electronically also. Resolution passes 25-0. 2018 Resolution 60, relocation order, County Trunk Highway FD, Pioneer Road, State Highway 175 to Ridgefield Way. Supervisor Gallant, Supervisor Bishop. Any questions, comments? Supervisor Martin.
I just have a comment relative to the road. I know it says 2020, but that eastbound lane is so bad. Can anything be done prior to that without expending a whole lot of money, but at least trying to address the difficulty it is for vehicles to pass there and not have a truck cross over the line and somebody get hit?
Yeah, so We do have some funds available from the Village of Richfield that was part of the arrangement for the jurisdictional transfer. It's certainly something we can take a look at. And we've known, when we took it over, it was part of why we asked Richfield for some funds to get us through 2020, because we knew that on almost an annual basis, they were going out there and doing some kind of repair. So we can certainly take a look at that. Scott's nodding his head, so I'm assuming that means he's going to go look.
People will appreciate that. Thank
Sure.
you very much.
Okay, see no further questions or comments, we'll vote electronically. Resolution passes 25-0. 2018 Resolution 61, transfer from Human Services Department, State Aid Base County Allocation, Children and Families Revenue Account to HSD outlay. Need a motion? Supervisor Basil, Supervisor Dice. Supervisor Galitz.
So my understanding is that we have 2 vehicles that we're trying to replace for $25,000. How is that possible?
Hi, I'm Sandy Wilford, Deputy Director of Human Services. In order to meet the $50,000 that we're requesting, 25 we already had an outlay, 25 is what we're requesting now. We have done a lot of work with the state contract, and we're allowed to secure funds, allowed to secure the cost of the vehicles under that contract. So for instance, we're getting a Ford Transit that's normally listed at $42,000. We're getting it for $28,000.
So we're effectively utilizing a state program.
Correct.
Thank you.
Okay, any other questions? Vote on this electronically. Resolution passes 25-0. 2018 Resolution 62, amend 2017-2021 Capital Improvement Plan, transfer from Jail Assessment Fund for the Jail Video Surveillance System Project. Supervisor Krebs, Supervisor Basil. Supervisor Dice.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just one question. Was IS involved in this project from the beginning? I mean, did they work hand in hand with the Sheriff's Department on this?
Go ahead. Hello, Captain Lehman, I'm the jail administrator. Yes, the county IT was involved in some of the initial planning, but ultimately the surveillance camera project operates under its own, the jail's own network. It's an isolated network. So they weren't involved in every single one.
Okay. You know, the reason I'm asking is I'm just wondering if maybe some of these additional expenses could have been determined prior if they were more involved. Is that a possibility?
Many of the expenses were a result of the vendor that won the RFP getting in and actually mapping our system. So our current system has grown over the last 18 years.
Okay.
It has been grown in sections and updates. So each one of those sections and updates were run differently throughout the jail. So they had to get in and establish kind of a roadmap of how everything was run. And that's where some of those things came in. We had some unforeseen things with server cabinets not being, we thought we could utilize the old ones.
Mhm. Yeah, I read your email, which was, very helpful. But that was my question. I wasn't sure from reading everything whether IT was involved or not, or how much. And I think it's always good to get them involved as much as we can to make use of that expertise. So that's my only comment.
So Captain Lehman's been very helpful, and Sheriff-elect Schulteis, you'll notice at the very end of this recommendation, I'm asking you to direct myself and the sheriff-elect to work together to come up with that comprehensive plan. And that was run through, my understanding is that was run through Captain Lehman and both the Sheriff Schmidt as well. And so that would be the plan. Rather than, and there's another component of this, it was referred to, I think, as a phase two with the Public Safety Committee. And it was talked about a little at Public Safety today. The IT will work much more closely and have a more comprehensive approach that still addresses everything Captain Lehman needs, and making sure that we come with one ask and not 4 or 5. So we hope that comes, and I'm asking you to put a gun to our head to bring it back by April of 2019.
Not a problem.
So, yeah, I knew you wouldn't have a problem.
All right.
Supervisor Bertram.
Thank you. You know, obviously, a lot of this stuff happened before I was here, but the way it looks to me when I went through this, it was like 30,000, and then we'll do 45,000, and then we'll gets us to 75, and then we'll do 38,000 gets us to 113, and then we end up with a little bit more, 45. Now we got 158,000, and then we got a estimated range of 330,000, coming up with $500,000. This is like a guy who wants to buy a motorcycle, so he buys the gloves, the jacket, and the helmet, and then says to his wife, "We really got to have a motorcycle because we got all this other stuff." I mean, I'm trying to figure it out, and I know I can't go backwards, but wouldn't this have been easier to, come and do this as a package and say, hey, this is what we want to do. We want to put this in and that in and all this kind of stuff, because it just seems, and again, I wasn't here, but it seemed like this thing got piecemealed, like, well, we'll do a $30,000 study or something, and then we'll do this and we'll do that and all that kind of stuff, knowing that the end result, what we wanted to come to, was having a good system, an updated system. Is that correct? Am I way off base?
I can give you a little background, because I know there's some new members out there from when this originally first started. When it was originally inserted into the capital improvement project, the $75,000 that we originally had labeled was really just a marker that was we knew going in, and that was made clear to the Public Safety Committee that was not going to be the cost of the project. It was just merely to get it into our capital improvement project and start working on it. The original purpose of this project was to address our more short-term needs while still setting us up for the future. So this project in itself wasn't meant to be we started, and by the end of it we have a completed system. The reason for that, our immediate needs were the back-end reporting end of things, which and is in desperate need of getting completed. So that was our short-term needs, and we knew whenever you change that back-end recording equipment, you got to start looking to the future. So our current system right now, our old system, we call it, are analog cameras that operate on coax and go down to DVRs and are recorded on DVRs. So in addressing the back-end recording equipment and setting us up for the future, because analog cameras are becoming a thing of the past, everything's going to IP cameras. We have a large amount of cameras that are covering the jail. For me to go in and clear out 200 plus cameras, analog cameras that are working correctly, is not fiscally responsible. So this project really was to address that back-end recording stuff, set us up for the future, and then have phases afterwards that we would start implementing IP cameras.
So when we're done with this, and from what we're talking about here, again, we're spitballing it at $300,000 after we already invested $158,000. We're going to have an up-to-date system from start to finish. So what you actually kind of repair, which needed repair, I can understand that, okay? But again, my concern is
the way I look at it is once you start doing that kind of stuff, I just think that whoever started this ball rolling, I think it would have been advantageous to say, hey, this is where we want to end up. Let's see what it's going to cost. Because it just seems like, as you said, we put X amount of dollars into fixing an old system that really needed to be replaced, and everybody kind of knew that. But let's do this real quick so that we get whatever, better views, better sight of different places, whatever. But we're going to just really get rid of it anyway. To me, I mean, I'm not opposed to this. Don't get me wrong. I fully support this, but it just seems like this thing really kind of went down a real little hill, and then it just rolled back up to a bigger one, and it just kept building and building, and now we're at a point where I think anybody in the room that's had any kind of project done, it's usually better to go from start to finish and get a price than we'll do this, and then all of a sudden we find out we don't need that, so then we take that out. And it was just kind of odd to me when I looked at it. I was like, I don't know that I would have done it this way. But that's my only comment. But I think we really need to do it. It's not that. But I just think in the future we should looking at the whole project rather than Band-Aid it for 2 years and then just turn around and end up with something that we got to do anyway. Just think it's kind of a waste. But again, that's fine.
Thank you. It's not necessarily Band-Aiding it. It is really replacing that back end, all of the backbone and back-end recording equipment that this initial project was focused on sets us up for the future to phase in, so that I'm not throwing out 223 analog cameras that are functioning. And so it's really just, it's setting us up for the future. As those analog cameras go down, then we can attack them in groups and get them replaced correctly. And our back-end recording equipment is already set up to handle that. That's really what it was.
And that's why the resolution is in front of you that's here today asking for the money, because I think we're all in agreement that that's the case. I think Captain Lehman has done a good job from the very start, and I think we're going to have good cooperative leadership in a month here that'll help make sure more along the line of what you're saying too, and trying to blend those two together, and that's been something we've been looking forward to. So I'm confident we'll be able to achieve more of what you're looking for. Some of the concern too is it's over 200 cameras, so the cost of replacing them all simultaneously, and then knowing 10, 15, 20 years we're gonna have to do it again. So you're 100% correct, and we'll do better when we come back next time.
Supervisor Mary.
Yeah, not to be critical of the sheriff's department, I think they've followed the directions of the professionals on this. I guess if any criticism should be leveled back at the vendor, I would check the qualifications of the person who filled out the RFP. At first, we needed one switch, but then they decided, well, no, we're actually going to need 5, and then we're going to have to reroute some cables for a cost of another $37,000. This should all have been included in part of the original proposal, at least from my way of thinking on it, sir. Thank you.
The original proposal did include an estimate between 1 to 7 switches. There was no way of them knowing the exact number of switches until they got in and mapped out all of our internal runs. So we did know that there was going to be a change order out there. We were only given between 1 and 7. So.
Supervisor Basil.
Captain Lehman, can you explain to the board what the jail assessment fund is? It's not coming out of the tax base, it's coming out of jail assessment funds. Can you explain that to them, please? Thank you.
So a jail assessment fund is a fund that it's basically funded by citations and forfeitures within the county. So it reads out to 1% or $10 of every forfeiture or fine that's paid within the county goes into this ever-growing fund. Wisconsin Statute 302.46 is what basically controls what that can be used for. So Counties may make payments for construction, remodeling, repair, or improvement of county jails, and for costs related to providing educational and medical services to inmates in the county jail. This project isn't funded by taxpayer dollars, it's actually funded by the jail assessment fund.
Supervisor Schleif.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I too, when I read this, went, what's going on? But now that you've explained, we thank you for digging through this and making the best of a situation.
Any other questions? We have a motion and a second. We'll vote on this electronically. Motion passes 25-0. 2018 Resolution 63, advisory resolution regarding moving certain 17-year-old offenders to juvenile court. Who's going?
So this resolution actually sets us up to differ with WCA a little bit. They are recommending, you saw their issue paper in your packet, they're recommending to move first-time nonviolent 17-year-old juveniles to juvenile court. What that would do is it would shift them then to our Human Services Department, which then would cost us who knows how much money, because who knows how many are going to be there. The bill authorized $5 million with the ability to go back and get another $5 million. We have no clue if that's going to be enough statewide. So this takes no position on moving the juveniles, but really says to the legislators, until you know how much this is going to cost, do not shift it from DOC to HSD. The state DOC to our HSD.
Supervisor McCune?
In the report, it says the 5 million, but in the WCA document, it's got 10 million.
So what that is, it's a $5 million appropriation with a joint finance committee passive review. If the $5 million isn't enough, they get another $5 million. So it's a total of 10, assuming no legislator opposes or the money.
And I didn't see that anywhere in your report.
That's the way the bill is written.
I understand that, but if you just read the report and you didn't have the other material from the WCA, you wouldn't know that. The second question is, from 1996 to 2018, we should have 12 years worth of data to go back and see how many would have been eligible to go through the system. We could have then made an estimate. Do we have those numbers?
I just talked to Sandy. We did do a number for, depending on how many juveniles it would be. There's different bills, different reforms that have been out there.
No, I'm just saying
Could be as
statistically
much
back
as a
from, for the last 12 years, those are done deals. We have the statistics, we know their ages, we have the system. Why didn't someone go through those years to see how many would have been part of this? Then we would have had real facts.
It's two components. It's the number, but then the types of services and the types of placement.
From what I read, it was nonviolent, you know, the criteria. Why, I still don't understand why we couldn't have done that.
We could, what we are setting up to, we don't, the issue is that transferring the money from the state DOC to us, I don't think is a good idea at all. There's a study, the last study that was done was $1 million for all of them. There are legislators that want to go further than this bill. And so to speculate what is coming next session, I think is going to be that what they go after is a much broader group of students.
And I don't want to speculate either. I just wanted to use facts of what was already there. And I think that would have been the report I would have had requested, but thank you.
Okay, before we go any further, let's entertain a motion first. Okay, a motion for this resolution. Supervisor Krebs, second by Supervisor Basil. Okay. Supervisor Bertram.
Thank you. Correct me if I'm wrong. The way I understood it was these would be first offenders. So there wouldn't really be any data that would show us well, yeah, this 16-year-old, he's been here before. We know he's probably going to be an offender. So, I mean, you really don't know exactly how many kids we're talking about because they haven't offended yet. Am I wrong? I mean,
Supervisor McHugh is suggesting is there's we know how many first offenders came through the system.
oh, I see.
Yeah,
Okay.
you use the historical data to project.
Okay, that way. All right. Thank you.
Okay, any other questions? Okay, we'll vote on this electronically. Resolution passes 22-3. Resolution, 2018 Resolution 64, Washington County transfer of Richfield Cabela's condominium unit number 1 to Cabela's. I need a motion to Supervisor Schleif, Supervisor Sorcy. Supervisor Bertram.
I feel like I'm on a roller coaster. When I was looking at this, and I was looking at the discussion on that particular page, again, under discussion, the last, I don't know, 3 sentences, I guess, kind of caught my eye, and the last actual sentence, it says, currently the outstanding bond obligation is approximately $1 million and is due to be paid off in March 2021. Then you go to the resolution, and let me see where I got it here. It says in essence that on lines 27 and 28 that the county got this condominium unit for $1, that type of thing. And then if you go down a little farther, oh man, bad thing of it is I had this written down, I left it at home. But then what it says is that someplace, I'm trying to find it, but I almost have it memorized. It says in there that even though the county bought it for $1, that still did not stop Cabela's from being liable for maintenance, that type of thing. And it says that that it was in there. Oh, here it says. Whereas it's line 30, it says, whereas the agreement provides that although the county owns condominium unit 1, Cabela's retains responsibility related to the maintenance, repairs, improvements, taxes, and all other costs and expenses related to the operation thereof. And then if you go down to it says something about, let me see, it says, okay, I can't find it. It said, to essence, that one of the deals that was part of what we were going after here is that one of the things in there said that it would go on the tax roll once they got it back. Okay.
So the way that
What does it say, 47?
the way that this agreement worked back then was that the county took out the loan that's spelled out in the resolution.
Mm-hmm.
We used the condominium unit essentially as capital.
Mm-hmm.
And in the event that Cabela's left or closed or whatever, we had that collateral to fall back on to pay the balance of the loan off. Now we're within just a couple years here of closing out. Cabela's has been purchased by Bass Pro Shop, and they're interested in
in using a different model. They lease their buildings, I guess, rather than own them. And so basically what we're looking at is, well, we're happy to give you the condominium unit so you can lease and do whatever you want, but we need collateral because we still have $1 million we got to pay. And we don't want you running out of town, essentially. Now, they don't have that intent, of course,
Right.
but the letter of credit is intended to backfill the collateral that the condominium unit had served as.
But the thing is that I'm getting at too is now I found that it was actually under discussion at the county board report. It's second paragraph down, starts with Bass Pro Shops. It says in there, the request was based on several factors. One, the convenience will allow the museum facility to be placed back on the property tax roll. I just read on the resolution that they were supposed to be paying taxes on this even though the county had it. Now it says that the county's gonna get to put it back on the tax roll. They should have been paying the taxes on it all the time is the way this reads. I didn't get that part of it. Then I didn't get the part where it says it's about $1 million, and then in the next part, line 5 through 7, on the, 5 through 7 on the resolution, on the second page, it says that now it's, that the obligation which stands at just over $1 million. Then it says that the county attorney of the conveyance, shall describe, no, that's okay. And then the letter of credit says that it's $500,000. So if they owe $1 million, why are we taking a letter of credit for $500,000? Does that make sense to anybody? I don't understand.
Okay.
I should have probably read the whole thing. I mean, I did read the whole thing, but I mean, I didn't hear.
So the current balance due on the debt outstanding as of today is $1,025,000. The
Yep.
next payment is actually due on March 1st. And what, most of that payment is going to be covered by the sales tax collections. It's, the sales tax generated by Cabela's within Washington County sales tax is what's applied against that payment. Any shortfall, Cabela's then makes up the difference directly to the county. So of the current $1,025,000 that's outstanding, based on our estimates of past experience, about $525,000 will be covered by the sales tax. And we expect to have about a $500,000 shortfall over the next 2 to 3 payments.
What all of that means is, after March, the amount of debt that is still due will be roughly 700,000, a little less than
It's
that.
about 675.
675. And so the reason we asked for a $500,000 letter of credit is ostensibly the bulk of it will be paid off. One can argue how much the condominium unit is really worth anyway. And so rather than getting into a back and forth, we settled on 500,000.
I can also tell you, I spoke with Cabela's counsel about this situation. They've done this same thing, at least in 2 or 3 other of their locations around the country. And those particular county governments did not request or require any sort of letter of credit or any kind of collateral whatsoever. And when we approached them with this request, they were quite taken aback, and it was a good couple of months or more that we just refused to even talk to them about conveying this particular condo unit to them. Ultimately, they did blink, and they decided they would give us a $500,000 letter of credit. They weren't pleased about it. This is against, I guess, any sort of precedent they want to set. But we did feel, based on that, this is a fairly adequate protection. One of the things about this particular agreement, and I looked at the development agreement, going back when it was originally signed, what you referred to, Supervisor, with regard to the maintenance and the taxes and so forth, it was really a catch-all paragraph, essentially saying they just have to cover all the costs of maintaining this thing, whatever those might be. I met with the real property lister about this because I was trying to figure out what is the value of this condo if it goes back onto the property rolls. What I'm told is they want to turn some of the museum space into retail space. And so what Brian Braithwaite in Real Property Lister's office told me was, as soon as January, if this conveyance goes through, the assessor will go out there and then put a value on this, and it'll become part of their property tax assessment.
Well, I know that could be a catch-all, but it states, matter of fact, that they owe taxes on that condominium unit. It's worth something. And they didn't pay any
yeah.
taxes all this time since this was started, is that
I
correct?
don't believe the paragraph reads that they would owe property taxes. It's just a catch-all paragraph, and it wasn't on the property tax rolls at all, so.
Well, that's
Yeah.
what I'm thinking, that it wasn't on the property tax rolls, because now it states that it's one of the things that's a big deal is that it's gonna go back on the property tax roll I'm reading it word for word, it says that they have to maintain it, and this, and this, and they have to pay the taxes.
Right, and that
But
was.
there was no taxes, right?
As far as I know, there may have been other taxes associated with the maintenance of that particular condo unit, and I don't know what those might have been. And I think that's how it was intended. This agreement goes back a long ways, and I didn't have a hand in writing it, but that's the intent I garnered from it, and the language I have here comes right out of the agreement. So I wanted to at least put that in here so you saw the history, and it was quite a convoluted history. We had to dig through upstairs to kind of piece all of this together. But at the end of the day, the idea here is that they're hoping to reinvest in that store. The council tells me they intend to keep it open, and it's a profitable location for them. I was concerned that they would be shutting the doors on this thing in a matter of a few months. They tell me that's not the case. Their council made that representation to me. So we do believe that they intend to keep the location open and running, and this, like Josh was saying, is just not a part of their current business model. They want to clear the titles so they have the ability to do renovations and that kind of thing within the store.
Well, yeah, I understand that, because, who buys a business if they don't want to clean it up? They want to get it where they know where they stand. I understand that. I understand what's going on, all that kind of stuff. I think the $500,000 is a reasonable thing to do, just from the standpoint, I think you can go back and not too long ago, there's plenty of companies that said, oh, we're going to be here forever, and then all of a sudden, they're gone. And I think GM is one of them that stayed, the feds bailed them out, and now they want to start moving stuff around. When they do, they're never going to leave. So I think the $500,000 is fine.
One of the reasons they balked at that initially was because they had said, well, within the development agreement, there are adequate protections. For example, it says in there that if they close the store, if they do certain things, and there's outstanding bond obligations, they acknowledge they have to pay off those bonds. So council said to me, it's in the agreement. You have a summary judgment motion. You can go to court, waive that in front of a judge, and say they owe us. And we said, yeah, but then I got to chase you around with a lawsuit and hope to collect. The letter of credit, at least, is a piece of paper I can take to the bank and say, pay up without a lot of the rigmarole that would go along with a lawsuit. That's one of the things that we saw the benefit of it. And so that's why we pushed so hard to get something from them. So.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Supervisor Martin.
I agree with the letter of credit being a better option. I think that's good. But I have a couple other questions. When we talk about condominium unit number 1, what are we talking about? The museum space?
Yes, so it's the mountain, there's the aquarium, there's the African display with the lions. There's also, I think, near the camping section, you can kind of walk through an area where they have some other, local taxidermy. Those things combined constitute the condominium unit number 1.
Okay, and they want to use it for all of it or part of it for other
My understanding
merchandise?
was part of it. It sounds like they want to leave the mountain as is because that's such a focal point of the store. But the other areas, I don't know what they intend to do with them. I would imagine they would probably leave the aquarium. But they didn't make any assurances one way or the other as to what stays and what goes.
Okay, we also have meeting space promised to us in that area. Does that go also?
Well, I believe that is part of condominium unit number 1, so
Okay.
it may well.
Okay, and then the other question I have is when we talk about conveyance, because if we don't, I don't know if conveyance is part of the terminology or just if it really is part of the property. Because if we don't convey before December 31st, we will not have taxes on that for next year. So if we're going to do this, I would urge that we get this done quickly.
They want to do it within the next couple of days.
Okay.
Originally, they told me that, couldn't I just get a letter from the clerk's office or something like that that indicated that we had permission to convey? And I said, no, we're going to go to the executive committee and ultimately county board for this. But we already have the documents drafted up and ready to go. It consists of a deed, deeding over the condo unit and a termination of condominium document we would file at Register of Deeds. It's essentially ready to go upon approval of this board, and if the board doesn't approve, we would just shred those up. But we're ready to do it I think they want to do it Monday, actually, is what they
Okay, and
told
then
me.
we will record the documents so that it's actually conveyed and finished?
Yes.
So the taxes, so we can get the taxes for next year?
That's the intent, and in fact, they've even started doing the real estate transfer return paperwork as well last week, and I told them to hold off until we got the approval of the board
Okay.
before you filed anything. So,
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Supervisor Krebs.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To start with, who is this with? Is this with Cabela's or is this with Bass Pro Shop?
They are still calling themselves Cabela's at this point.
So the letter of credit is from Cabela's?
Correct.
So what happens if Cabela's shuts down tomorrow, though, and Bass Pro Shop steps in and takes over at that point?
Well, Bass Pro Shop has taken over. The way, I guess, you referenced this, their business model is they sort of lease back the stores. So Bass Pro Shop owns the stores, leases them to Cabela's is what it sounds like. So they are the umbrella company, Bass Pro Shop, but they still use the Cabela's name and Cabela's.
That's what I'm concerned over, though. The different companies, it's easy enough to shut one down and open another one up.
Fair enough, but like I say, when I talk to them, they're acknowledging their one ownership group. They use the Cabela's terminology for anything dealing with Cabela's store, that's why.
Okay.
But I'll clarify that, and I can let you know for sure.
With the original developers agreement, are there any penalties or call out any language about, we're taking public space, what we're proposing on doing here is taking public museum space and changing it to private retail.
Right. No
Early, and this is taxpayer funded, that's going to become retail space.
There's no penalty clauses in the agreement. All the agreement says is that when they pay off the bonds, they have the option to get that condo conveyed to them, or sooner if the parties agree. I did check with our bond counsel as well to make sure there wouldn't be any problems with the outstanding bond obligation, any sort of default on our end. They indicated there are no issues.
Okay. The letter of credit at $500,000 is leaving us some exposure. Why would we do that?
Well,
Right, I understand the one thing that you do have better is it's easier to collect on part of what we would be owed, but we'll still be short a couple $100,000.
It sounds that way. It was just a term of the negotiation. It's what we could get. We did go in and spend several months working with them, and ultimately we said, it's got to be at least this, and that's what they came back with. We know there's some exposure, but again, the potential to go after them in terms of a lawsuit, we can certainly do that. We're not left unprotected, just that it's a little harder to collect.
Next question, the tax roll, you didn't really give a certain number. What, that seems like the second upside for us is if we do it right now, we can collect sales, or is it property tax we're talking next year?
Right.
Do we know what the increase would be for those areas? Because we don't even know what part of the Unit 1 they're going to convert or not convert.
Right.
So if we do this and if January 1 they haven't converted any of it, is it still not taxable then?
Well, Unit 1 will be completely, whether they convert it or not, will now be on the property tax rolls, whether they convert it to retail space or not. It'll be conveyed to them, it'll be theirs.
Because like a house, you go and look what's their January 1 and that's what you're taxed on.
Right.
So
Right.
January 1, if there's no clothing racks, retail racks in those areas and other things, I'm wondering how much more are we going to see out of this?
And I don't know. I did talk to the property lister. I thought maybe we could get a gauge on the square footage and figure that out, and he said there was really no way to know for sure till an assessor got in there. So I really don't have it. I'd be guessing, and I wouldn't want to do that. It's an unknown number at this point.
I hate running up to the last minute where we pass it now to possibly get tax the money out of this versus losing it when we don't know what we're gonna get. Is there any, since this is a negotiation, and it sounds like it's already negotiated with staff and Cabela's or Bass Pro Shop, but not with the county board, this county board here seems to be awfully concerned about dark store theory. Is there any way to insert language into these negotiations that they're not gonna come back and fight their assessment once we start taxing them on this new area?
It's already happened.
What's already happened?
Cabela's has already gone through that process.
They've exercised their dark store theory.
They negotiated down their assessment
Okay.
drastically.
So,
That was before Bass Pro owned them.
so why would we want to give them more property for them to just argue lower yet? I'm not
We want to
expecting an
get
answer
out of
from
this
you.
business.
I'm just bringing that up for the board that's concerned about dark store theory so much.
We want to get out of this business. The bottom line is the letter of credit is substantially more secure for us than the condominium units. We'd be stuck in litigation trying to figure out what in the bleep condominium unit number 1 means. Right now, they leave, we pull a $500,000 letter of credit and pay our bill. Done.
And
Doesn't
just-
matter if they close or not.
The $500,000 line of credit is not,
Letter of credit.
sorry, a letter of credit is not our cap. We can still go after them for other damages.
Doesn't get
correct?
them off the hook. But I do want to say to your other point, though, Supervisor Krebs, we did bring this to executive committee, and executive committee did give us the green light on a $500,000 letter of credit. It wasn't something we just pulled out of the air and didn't include the board or supervisors on. I want you to know, we met in closed session about it because we wanted the ability to negotiate and talk about terms and so forth, and that's what came out of executive committee's closed session.
Okay.
so.
But we still have the right to go for more damages if we would
Absolutely.
have to go that route.
Absolutely.
Okay. Thank you.
Supervisor Schleif.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As a last comment to protect our interests, we're told there's a payment coming in March of 2019. Is that sales taxes that are already out of their pockets, so there's no way they can back out of that?
They have 19 more days to hit December 31st, and then all of their payments for sales tax will have been made. The difference would be how short are they? Every year we've had this, they've been short. They've sent us a check. They've been a good corporate citizen that way. They sent us a check and made up the difference just like they said they would. So that deadline for that amount is December 31st. We just won't find out until March because there's a lag in sales tax reporting.
All right. I was there on Black Friday and helped pay some sales tax.
Nice job.
Doing our part.
Nice job.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, seeing no further discussion, we'll vote on this electronically. Resolution passes 24-1. 7-minute break, please. Okay, ordinance, 2018 ordinance 12, per diem compensation, 420. Any motion to accept? Supervisor Schleif, Supervisor Gonring. Supervisor Dice.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On the bottom of the ordinance, I have to catch my breath. Does the wording on page 2 of the ordinance on lines 10 through 12, I think I would like those changed to reflect that this applies to not just county board supervisors. On page 2, lines 10 through 12, where it talks about the fiscal impact will be dependent on the frequency of out-of-state travel by county board supervisors. It's not just county board supervisors, it's department heads, any other constitutional officers that end up going to out-of-state.
Addressed as an amendment, or is that just a friendly change?
It's the fiscal note, so it doesn't become part of the ordinance. For purposes of just housekeeping, I suppose you could clean up the draft, but when it goes into the ordinance, the only language that will appear is what you see in the blue.
Okay.
And it's subsection, I think it's under 4.20, sub 3, something 2. Anyway, in any event, the actual parent paragraph does indicate it applies to, as you see,
Yes,
everybody. So,
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that was my other question, I guess, was in my mind, whether this really shows up somewhere that it would be important or not, and if it doesn't, then I'm fine.
It's usually just for informational purposes for the board to know the fiscal impact of the ordinances and resolutions and so forth that we bring before you. So it won't appear anywhere in the actual county law.
Okay, great, thank you.
Supervisor Bossert.
Okay, I'm going to be proposing an amendment to this. I think we should follow what private businesses do, and typically they base this rate on IRS guidelines. So in trying to figure out what exactly those currently are, because I'm not an accountant,
That would be a motion to refer back to committee, because we want to, if that's what you want to do, we'll want to look into what that even
well,
means.
if you let me get there, because I've been working a little bit with Margie on this. We, like, over the course of a couple breaks here, so. But essentially, so we were trying to figure out what that is. I tried looking at it on my own. I saw a couple different things. So Margie and I looking together, essentially, it looks like what traditionally is used is an average of the highest and lowest rate on the government standard accounting chart that they have for daily meal reimbursement. So I'm going to be proposing that we change this to that. Have you seen what that would be currently?
So what supervisor is referring to is the federal government uses rates set by the GSA, which is the General Services Administration. Those rates follow a high-low method, which basically means that they have a standard rate, which is $55, that's the low end, which is set for most areas. Then they have what's called a non-standard area. There's about 325 of those. Those rates range anywhere between the $55 up to $76 based on that locality. So some of the high rate areas are areas such as DC, California, Florida, Colorado, Boston, Chicago. Instead of trying to follow all 325 rates, which change every year, and figuring out which locality you are traveling to, or any of the out-of-state travel. What some businesses tend to do is take the average between that high and that low number and use that as their meals and incidentals rate. So that would actually be about $64 rounded based on the 2019 rates.
And a little bit about the reason why it's good to follow that. If we reimburse too much, the IRS can view that not as a reimbursement, but as taxable income that was paid to the person receiving it. So, hypothetically, let's say Josh travels out to DC and we reimburse too much, Josh has to pay taxes on that. So I think we're good following that best practice, and that's what I'm proposing as my amendment.
I think in terms of what you're referencing, Supervisor Bossert, there's a difference between the per diem and reimbursement, and actually I looked into this too and kind of anticipating
Okay.
your concerns. And the way per diem works, for example, is if you follow that $55 a day rule for meals, and you spend $75 a day, you could potentially get taxed as income because it's over what was allotted, that $55. Now you're talking you got more income. With reimbursement, you're truly just getting paid back for what you spent. And so there is a slight difference there. If you follow what I'm saying, I think that you would be fine. I don't think you would be taxed. Now, I'm not a tax attorney, and I don't want to give anyone tax advice, obviously, in here. But I think there's maybe it's too late. There's a bit of a difference between the per diem and reimbursement, and I think, and I saw those the GSA rates. They went into effect of October for 2019.
think October
They're all over the
1st,
map.
yeah.
New York City is $288 a day, I think, for per diem, so.
So I think that's including hotels and.
Yeah. Right.
So there was a rate for hotels, there was a rate just for meals?
Yeah, it's $94 a day is the hotel rate around the country right now under the GSA. Of course, it changes from city to city too, obviously.
Yeah.
So, but the $75 rate you see here seems to be generally in line, but it's your call, whatever you think is best.
So that's my motion.
Are you making a motion to reduce it to $64 amount?
To reduce it, but I want it to be adjusted each year as these rates change. So we're not having to come back each year and change it. So to reduce it to the average of the low rate and high rate, which currently is $64.50.
Okay. Is there a second to the amendment? You're making a second, Supervisor Gallantz? Okay, we have a second. Okay. All right, any further discussion on the amendment? Okay, seeing none, are we ready to vote on the amendment?
What language would you like the amendment to be?
Oh.
Any specific language?
Supervisor Bossert, do you want to?
Okay, let's look at it real closely here and make sure we got the language. Well, I think it's got to be changed in the code. I'm trying to find the attachment. Here we go. Okay. So I think looking at the county code, we would have to change it on line 22, or pardon me, line 24, to a total of, and instead of $75, it would have to say the average of the low and high GSA rates.
Do you have that?
No, it'd be one rate then. Because that's the whole point, is we don't want to have to look at 325 different metropolitan areas anytime we travel. That's unwieldy.
Okay. Okay. The amendment has been motioned and seconded. We can vote on the motion, or on the amendment.
So I have a motion to amend ordinance 12 on line 24, striking $75 and changing it to a total of the average of the low and high GSA rates.
Which at this point would be $64.50.
Right.
Do you want that included, or do you want it to be the low and high rates? So you don't have to change it every year?
I think I think it would change year to year.
I can make a recommendation on the language too, if it's helpful.
Yeah, absolutely.
What about shall be determined by taking the average of the high and low U.S. General Services Administration per diem rate for the current year? And that could be established by finance and kept on file, I suppose, for the current year, without having to put in an ordinance every year and change the ordinance every year.
Yeah.
Good with that? Okay. You ready then? Okay. Hang on. Supervisor Sorcy, did you want to speak to the amendment? Supervisor Sorcy? Supervisor Sorcy, did you want to speak to the amendment?
Are we on? There we are, okay. I just wanted to say that, you know, he said cut out the 325. We shouldn't cut out the 325. For number one, you know, there's a lot of us that travel around. Josh travels a lot of places. Mr. McEwen travels all the time. So. Oh, but you could.
I've never been asked.
Well, that's a different story. I mean, you got business stuff to do. When I travel, you try and go the cheapest way possible. But I mean, if you're stuck in a situation where you're going to spend $75 for the day, and what are you going to do? I think 75 is more than adequate.
Anybody speaking to the amendment? Supervisor Gauss?
Yeah, I just want to make sure I understand it. It says for out-of-state travel for the meal, correct? Not in-state?
In-state remains at 50.
Right. So I'm trying to understand why would costs appreciably increase when you're out-of-state versus in-state? So what are we trying to solve for?
Supervisor Sorcy, do you want to answer to that?
Yeah, there are some of us that travel out of state. So, you know, when it happens, why not? I mean, it's not a big deal. How often do we do it? When we do it, you know, it makes sense.
Supervisor Gauss?
For clarity, why would cost increase in traveling out of state versus in-state? So why have a separate amount for out of state versus in-state?
Practically speaking, it's substantially more expensive depending on where you're going. If you're going to DC, I think somebody said that, New York, Phoenix, it's significantly more expensive. $75 won't cover New York. Which is why the GSA rate is 283.
Anyone else speaking to the amendment? Okay. Do we have it? Are we good? Supervisor Carr?
It seems to me that if we're going to essentially follow the GSA recommendations, it should be following them for the entire country, not just in and out of the state of Wisconsin. So the whole purpose of this is to bring ourselves in line with federal regulations and federal recommendations. If that's the case, those federal regulations or recommendations apply just as much in the state of Wisconsin as they do out of the state of Wisconsin. So if we're going to follow federal guidelines, it ought to be for the whole country, not just outside the state of Wisconsin. So if we're going to change this, then it should be just changed per diem, no matter where you are, it seems to me.
Okay. Are you making another amendment?
I'm just suggesting we change the amendment, if in fact we want to do that, and I'll defer to Supervisor Bossert because it's his amendment, but I don't see why we would have such a minimal difference between $14 a day between in and out of Wisconsin. We might as well just, if we're going to make it $64, it should be $64 everywhere. What do you think, Supervisor Bossert?
I can see the logic, am I on? Okay, I can see the logic of that. At the same time, a lot of times when we're traveling in-state, we're more likely to start our travel day in the morning at home, incur fewer meals. So that's another factor to think about too. But I'm open to changing the in-state rate as well if we think that the expenses in-state match nationally. But for right now, let's vote on this, and maybe we do that as another amendment if you're so inclined.
Okay. All right. Are we ready to vote on the amendment? Okay, we'll vote electronically on the amendment. Amendment fails, 18-7. Okay. Back to the original ordinance. Supervisor Schleif.
My questions were answered.
Okay. Any further discussion on the ordinance? Seeing none, are we ready to vote? Vote electronically on the ordinance? Motion passes 20-5. 2018 Ordinance 13, Washington County Staffing Plan, Planning and Parks Department, Administrative Division, and Washington County Classification Compensation Plan. What?
I think it's on that button.
Oh, did you want to speak on?
You voted no.
Are you requesting a revote immediately?
No.
All right, I'll entertain a motion for ordinance 13. Supervisor Bullowa, Supervisor Rob Brandt. Any discussion on this? Supervisor Dice.
Is the $5,000 increase, is that for the calendar year 2019? Is that the, I guess that's my only question.
I believe it's reflective of what will be the cost of living adjustment at the top of the grade. The county's current transit manager is at step 11 in grade 8. So when he comes over, that would be the increase I believe that he would receive. Is that correct?
It's the difference between what was budgeted in 2019 and what will most likely occur with the staff that's moving over.
Okay, so it's just that amount then for 2019. Okay, thank you.
Supervisor Galitz.
Thank you. I'm just trying to understand if we're adding a staff, what's currently not getting done or completed by land use that would require an additional resource?
Yes, thank you. So it's not a staff position ad. Right now, there will be a vacant Parks and Planning Analyst position, which is essentially a combination of a project person. The person in the existing role is a trained Pouts inspector, was working towards servicing customers as they came in, as well as phone calls in the division. With the vacancy, we have regraded the position, looked at the duties, structured it to fit the needs of the department as it's evolving, and retitled it as we are proposing to move over the county's existing transit manager into that role.
And so what additional role and responsibilities will the role perform that currently not being performed?
The position was adjusted slightly to put in requirements to obtain POUT certification as well as soil testers progressively as the person is trained in the position to basically solidify that role and succession plan in the department. In addition, the position is going to take on some grant reporting requirements in the county's brownfields program and take some project lead roles that currently were not outlined in the existing analyst position.
That's helpful because in the last few months, we've added positions and added salaries to the budget. So we want to ensure that it's not a short-term need versus a long-term need. So what I'm hearing you say is it's sustainable work for the future?
Yes.
Thank you.
Supervisor Schleif.
So the transit manager is moving over. Did we consider his position more planning now than highway, and then he's going to assume some extra responsibilities? Is that what is happening?
No. The transit manager position will be vacated. And the conversation with Public Works Committee that just happened over 2 hours ago now, was that we would reach out to Ozaki County and start a discussion with them about should we have a shared transit manager position and stuff. So open the door to talking to them first and then go from there.
Thank you.
Supervisor Krebs.
Thanks. My question was half answered. Going back to the transit manager, though, I was at that meeting 2 hours ago. that was the whole part where Scott and them were saying that they'll pick up the slack in the meantime, while that position's left open.
Right.
So that, the transit manager position is just a separate issue from what we're talking about here.
Truly, yes.
But the transit manager must have some skill sets that will, that allow him to be hired as a land use planning analyst.
Yes, as a matter of fact, he came from there.
Okay, just make,
Just
just
happens to be going back.
following how it's going. Thank you.
Yep.
Supervisor Martin?
Thank you. I'm still confused. So what did the planning and parks analyst do versus what the land use and planning analyst will do?
The Parks and Planning Analyst position, when that was created, was, if you trace back the history, was the combination of the office manager and a program assistant, and another program assistant was eliminated. So the job holds a customer service role that the department really needs. And what we found as we've evolved that position is the need and the desire to really be able to serve customers on the spot related to permit type issues as they come in. And so with the individual that we had hired into that role, the role somewhat evolved as he seeked professional development, out certifications, started taking on more of the permit burden, and was relied upon for more project work than what was originally reflected in that job description. So with the vacancy, we took the opportunity to update the job to fit what those needs truly are, which is what triggered the regrading from HR.
So office manager and what was combined?
There was a program assistant position that was eliminated, and then the office manager was filled with the analyst.
Okay, seeing no further discussion, we'll vote on this electronically. Ordinance passes 24-1. Moving on to discussion and action on Washington County Golf Course appraisal. Go ahead.
Okay. All right, so, under consideration today, is the seeking, an appraisal for the Washington County Golf Course. I want to preface this with the presentation I'm about to give you. I understand that this went to land use planning a week or so ago. There was a tie vote, 4 supervisors that were there at that meeting. County Board Chairman Creefalt broke the tie to get it to County Board. And I want to give you the context of why we're here and what we're actually asking you to do. And knowing, of course, that everybody sitting on that side of the dais is thinking, this is really selling the golf course. But let me walk you through the logic for how we're here and why we're here. So why come to the County Board? So this has been an issue for quite a long time, but in October, we received a written letter, obviously, a letter from an interested buyer. We had been contacted a couple of months prior, less formally, but we received a letter now from this individual indicating they were interested in purchasing the Washington County Golf Course. So to the best of my knowledge, that's the first time we've ever received a letter of that nature, being that specific, saying they wanted to make a purchase. I want to emphasize throughout this presentation, the reason we're standing in front of you today, the reason we went through land use committee to get to the county board with this, and you'll notice this isn't a resolution, this is asking you to take action only. The reason we're doing that is because I believe, and staff believes, I think, that staff is not positioned to recommend an answer to that October letter. The letter was specifically saying, in essence, I'm interested in buying, are you interested in selling? So from our perspective, it was we should initiate a process of due diligence. First, proposing to do the appraisal, which is what we're talking about now, as a first step for policy consideration, if you want to have policy consideration. I wanted to leave this to the county board. It's why it's an action item. It's why it came to you. It's why it went through committee to come here first, because I know the politics that surround this issue. In addition, with regard to due diligence, the county board chairman and I also have begun some meetings to get a sense of where folks are at. We met with one of the leading donor families earlier this week and heard from another one today. Both are overwhelmingly opposed to the sale of the course, but understand the process as I'm about to lay it out to you. I also did a little bit of a review of a comparable sale. We oftentimes compare ourselves to the Bog. That course in the village of Cedarburg, or city of Cedarburg, or just outside of it, I guess, was sold in 2015 for $1.99 million, and it was listed and had been on the market for some time for $3.5 million. So all of that being said, that is the limit of the due diligence we've done to this point. I believe if you decide to move forward with the policy consideration, that there's significantly more due diligence to do, but that's really as far as we've gone. That being said, I know that this issue is 100% gray. There's nothing black and white about it, and I want to walk through that with you here today. So furthermore, why is it coming to the county board specifically? Again, as I stated earlier, I don't believe staff is in a position to recommend how we answer that letter. I don't think it's our role to respond to that letter. I think it's your role to respond to that letter. I don't think the county board chair is even in a position unilaterally to respond to that letter, but that's just my opinion. This has been an ongoing public debate for well over a decade, and it's represented very well on the right-hand side of this slide. The last full strategic planning process that we did, not the strategic priority session, but the full strategic planning process we did back in 2015. Those of you who are here, I think there's about 13 of you left, if I recall right. We had a big board up here that had asked three different questions. What are we currently doing that we should keep doing? What are we currently doing that we should stop doing? And what aren't we doing that we should start doing? In the what are we currently doing that we should stop doing, 13 of the 30 supervisors that participated said either directly the golf course or ostensibly the golf course. Today, of course, that's half the county board. Now I know not all 13 of those folks are here. We don't know exactly who wrote those down, but I also know there were people who didn't write golf that have thought for a long time we should get rid of the golf course. Again, I don't think staff is in a position to recommend how to answer that letter. So I fully understand the emotion and the passion around this issue. I've done enough research dating back to 1991 when the original donation was considered and accepted, and some of the other families stepped forward, that this is a very emotional and passionate issue. And I also know that the consequences of whatever you do today, whatever you do ultimately with the policy decision, will have significant impacts on the future of other public policy decisions, even ones that have absolutely nothing to do with the golf course. So here's how I view it. And here's the way that if you decide to move this policy discussion forward, I'm going to keep trying to referee you to keep coming back to these things. This is a balancing test. It comes down to balancing between ideological purists and sentimental pragmatists. Do you firmly believe in the fact that the things that are listed on the left, ostensibly boiling down to the county, as a county board supervisor, you have an ethical obligation to society or your constituents to clearly separate private and public sector? If that's your principled position, then you're likely into that camp. On the other hand, the sentimental view or pragmatic view is we have an ethical obligation to constituents, donors, and their families, golfers maybe, to protect this quality of life amenity. There's nothing wrong with either one of those things, and quite frankly, you may not fall directly in either one of those camps. So there's this balancing test that has to happen. And you're the only people in this county that can make that decision collectively. So the first question that we came to is, if you're going to even have this discussion, and the first question is, are you going to even have this discussion? But I can't ask that in a policy question. So the policy question is, if you're going to, you need to get an appraisal so you have data and facts to talk from. And so when you start to do that balancing act, on the left, how much do each one of those, or on the right, excuse me, how much do each one of those different issues weigh out? For different people, they're going to have different weights, meaning the balance is going to sway one way or the other. But ultimately, it's kind of that middle piece, the appraisal, the sale price. Is there a price point that's high enough to outweigh all of both the tangible and intangible value of past donations and potential future donations as represented on the right? If there's a dollar amount that golf course could sell for that moves you into the ideological side, then you need to start thinking about what that is. And it could be an absolute no. There is no dollar amount. There's nothing wrong with that. But that's the first question we're asking today. So again, staff is not positioned to recommend an answer to the October letter. We are going to ask that happen. I think we have an obligation to respond to this individual. So a few things for you to consider. These aren't necessarily the policy questions per se, but a few things to consider as you're contemplating, should you direct staff to go and get an appraisal or not. Number one, the main question, should the county stay in the golf course business, yes or no? To help answer that question, we've got one data point, the sale of the bog. Is that price point close enough to help influence that balancing act that I told you about? Clearly, Joe Gunnering's shaking his head, no, it's not close enough for him. I know there's other people in this room that completely disagree with that. So that's what the discussion you have to have right now. And at number three, should the county board authorize the execution of an appraisal of the golf course and fund the same using tax levy? That's the policy question we're asking you to answer. In reality, I know you all know that if you answer yes to that, people will cast all kinds of dispersions that you want to sell the course, or maybe you don't want to sell the course. I understand there's all kinds of consequences to doing just that, but these are the things we're going to ask you to balance out. If your answer to question number one is no, we shouldn't be in the business anymore, or you need more information, you don't know, then vote yes to this resolution. Have us start doing due diligence. If your answer to the first question is yes, we should stay in the business, then vote no to the resolution. It's that simple. Again, if you're going to proceed in any way, shape, or form, we're asking you to vote yes, to have us proceed and get the appraisal so we can have more discussion. So while on the one hand I'm telling you this is not a discussion about should we sell the golf course or not, I'd be lying if everybody would know I was lying if I said that wasn't the question. It certainly is part of the question. We're trying to find the best way to facilitate it, and if you say we don't want to talk about it at all, then vote this down and send a clear signal that you don't want to talk about it at all. That's it. And I'm happy to answer any questions if you have them.
Well, I'm going to make a statement first, and October received that letter of interest regarding private acquisition of the Washington County Golf Course. Once I got it, I felt it's absolutely necessary to do our due diligence before making such a consequential decision. This has been part of our community for a long time. Part of that due diligence is to ascertain the value of the property. As such, I was the deciding vote at the November Land and Planning Committee. I broke the tie and wanted the board to make the decision on this. Another part of the due diligence that we've been doing is to ascertain the sentiments of the stakeholders and community leaders. Since that meeting, Josh and I have worked to gauge these sentiments, spoken with representatives of both the Ziegler and Rolfs families, as well as numerous constituents and local leaders. Following these informative decisions, I've come to the conclusion that there is not, in fact, according to comparables in the area, a price point high enough at this time to outweigh the tangible and intangible value of past donations and potential future donations. As the park system knows that we are leaning heavily on the private sector to come out and help with things. So I think that's problematic in itself. I will vote no on today's policy question and to approve an appraisal of the golf course, and I encourage you all to vote the same. Thanks. Supervisor Bullock.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I had two questions. First one, I guess anybody could have written that letter, so I guess I want to make sure that the person who did write it, are they a qualified buyer? Are they someone that could go through with this? I mean, I don't want you to identify who it is, obviously, but I wanted to make sure that it's credible.
We have reason to believe, we haven't done any kind of background check, we're taking it for face value. We have reason to believe there's enough evidence to point to, yes, it's a credible buyer.
Okay. And then the second question is, what is the cost of having the appraisal done?
I think we're asking for $5,000, is that right? $4,500. Sorry, $4,500.
Supervisor Krebs. Oops, sorry. Do you have something else, Supervisor Bullock? Okay. Supervisor Krebs.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First off, thank you for bringing this to County Board so we can have this discussion today. I appreciate that. I'd like to ask if we would have the appraisal done. You had a slide that showed kind of what it would cover slightly, but I would like to have included in that a little bit bigger view. Not only what is its sale value, but what is its leased value. The discussion is, the heated discussion will be, should we sell it or not? But I think there's a lot of in-between area that it doesn't have to be a county-run course, but it can still be county-maintained, or can be county-owned but operated by someone else. So I understand that that appraisal would cost more money, but I think that should be included in it. So the next discussion that we have, if we do clear the first hurdle, we actually are having the full discussion, not just one option that the county has with that. So I would push for a expanded appraisal showing all options that would work for the county. Other than that, doesn't hurt for us to know what that course is worth. It's not saying that we're selling it, but at least you know what it is worth. So both sides do have informed, up-to-date numbers. So I'll be voting for it. Thank you.
Supervisor Dice.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think there is a policy issue that we need to decide once and for all. As you indicated, this has been talked about over ad infinitum, and as to, do we keep it, do we sell it, what do we do with it? I think getting an appraisal gives us some information, but there's a lot more that needs to be obtained before we can make an informed decision one way or another. And this is just one step that will help in that discussion process. So I don't see any harm in that. But, you did talk to two of the families that donated. I'd like to know if there are any caveats on the original donation that was made and any other pertinent information to this issue, including financial information, and as much data as we can get so we can all make an informed decision on this. Thank you.
Supervisor Bishop.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Past boards put an emphasis on parks to make them sustainable and to even consider starting to divest this park. This is helping to meet that goal of making those parks sustainable. And I know some comments in the past have been, well, this is a business that's competing with other businesses. Well, then we should divest other parks because they are competing with wedding facilities And how far do you go? I don't think we should pull apart, they're working very hard to make parks sustainable. We start getting rid of things, you're not going to meet that goal.
Supervisor Kelly.
I guess, first of all, thanks, Josh, you're right. Bring it to the board. I think it's the best place for it. And I agree with your initial assessment, Don, that we need all the information we can. I would consider myself a pragmatist, quite honestly. This land was donated to us, so there's a certain respect that I give to that. I also feel that this is part, like Ms. Bishop said, that this is part of what we need to make our park self-sustaining. Once you sell it, it's a one-time sale, and once you spend it, it's gone. Unless you can find another way to make that money, make money for you, that's off the table. But that being said, I also agree that there are certain members in this body who do believe we should be divesting ourselves of this golf course and not competing with local business. And I have huge respect for that opinion. And I do believe that we should do our due diligence in at least getting the information. So I will go along with this to get the assessment done on the property. It does not necessarily mean I will vote for getting rid of the golf course, but I do believe that we should at least look at it at this point. Thank you.
Supervisor Connery.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think everybody here knows how I already feel on this item. A lot of things were already said that I was going to bring up, and I won't rehash. But everybody has to remember, the bog brought $1.99 million. Our golf course, over a 10-year period, is going to bring in over $1 million. Because we gave, or the golf course gave, $100,000 last year. Is deemed to give more next year on a sliding type scale. It's supposed to be giving more. One thing that wasn't up there on that slides, which was brought out actually at our land use meeting, was there's also 15% of the wages for part of the administration going there also, directly out of there. So I mean,
Parks Administration.
yes. So I mean, there's a lot of things that are going out of there and that are help funding our park systems. Some goes to the general fund, some goes directly to wages. So what are we gonna do? If we would sell this property, we're gonna lose at minimum $100,000 a year. Over a 10-year period, I kinda average it out, it's gonna be about $137,000 a year, average. So that's $1.3 million. I guess you don't get too much from the bog then. If you're getting $1.3 million over a 10-year period already on our golf course, and we still own it.
So I'll help you with the numbers a little bit, because we
Yeah.
did some due diligence. The tax bill, if it were privately owned and valued at $2 million, the county portion of the tax bill would be about $5,000.
Right.
If it were valued at what we think it costs us from previous reports, total cost of construction and purchase, et cetera, was about $7.2 million. At the current tax rate, that's about $18,000 per year just for the county. That's not counting, of course, the school district and the technical college and the municipality, town of Hartford in this case. So that number is up on the right, I guess it's the third bullet.
Mm-hmm. Okay. The other thing here, this has been brought up numerous times here. And if I can remember back, and my memory's not as good as it used to be, but somebody up in the front there said, well, I guess we know you don't want to get rid of the golf course, that's the end of that. Well, here it is again, bringing it up again. You're going to keep on kicking the can until you get the right number of people in here that you can, put a handle over or something? No, I don't think so. I think in that, spending that $4,500 might look like not much money, but it is a lot of money to a lot of people. And we're spending their money for something that I don't believe will be a saleable part. And as far as this letter coming here, why didn't all of us get a copy of this letter?
Can I have a copy of the letter?
Names and all.
Copy of the letter.
I mean, when they send something in, that's public knowledge, public record. So it could be out there.
Get the copy of the letter.
Okay. Well, I think you all know I'm voting no.
Supervisor Bertram.
Thank you. First of all, as far as Mr. Gunner was saying, I was off the board for 6 years, and 6 years previous to that, this same thing was talked about. My feeling about this is, and I've always said this as long as I've been on the board, is that the people give this to the county in trust. They assume that it's going to continue on. That's why they give it to us, or they would have sold it themselves and taken the money. They wanted to give something to the county, something maybe that Dad was real proud of because he established it or whatever. So they gave it to the county in trust. And all of a sudden you talk about selling it. Well, as far as I'm concerned, if you sell it, why don't you give the money to the people that gave it to you? They were the one that should have got the money. If they wanted to sell it, they would have sold it. They gave it to us. They gave it to us to use, and as Supervisor Gunring said, it brings in a profit, it doesn't cost us anything. As far as evaluation, I don't think the BOG came up with $3.5 million off the top of their head. Somebody appraised it at 3.5, and they sold it for 1.99. I mean, it's whatever a person is willing to pay for it is what it amounts to. We all know that. I mean, you want to sell a used car, it's whatever anybody wants to pay for it. I just think that the park system is, if you're going to look at it dollar-wise, I think it's better to have something, an entity that's making money that you can use every year as a park system. Again, Mr. Gomery said it too, is once you sell it, you got it. Then you use it up, and then you're going to be looking at where you're going to get money again to take care of the park system. I just think it's, all around, it's a bad deal for the family that donated it and for the people that would use the money now. Thank you.
Supervisor Carr.
Thank you, Chairman. Well, I have to agree with a lot of what's been said as far as starting out with your comments, Don, and Dick, and a variety of other people. I think this is a subject that we ought to nip in the bud right now. The fact is that from a public relations standpoint, this Board of Supervisors has already created a lot of disaffection in the community by doing what they did with the parks. Everybody I talk to who knows that I'm a supervisor brings up the same subject: quality of life, quality of life, quality of life. What's the matter with the county supervisors? Why have they set this priority situation such that quality of life doesn't get supported? Well, now we're talking about another quality of life issue. And if the word gets out, which of course it will, we have representatives from the newspaper here today, as we always do, that we're retaining an appraiser to appraise the golf course, that immediately is going to jump into the minds of practically everybody who reads the article that, oh, they're going to sell the golf course. They're screwing up the parks. Now they're going to sell the golf course, which supports the parks. What's the matter with these guys? These historically wealthy families that donated this money, they're making money off the golf course. Now they're going to goof that up, just like they goofed up the parks. So the other thing that we have to consider is that I was a business consultant for many, many years, and I can promise you what's going to happen is if this thing does get sold, the greens fees that are now favorable towards the residents of Washington County because they get a discount and are reasonable even if you don't get a discount for playing such a lovely course are going to go up substantially. We know what happens with these situations. Whenever one of these kinds of operations sells, first thing they do is increase the greens fees. Look at what they're charging over at Erin Hills. Now, I'm not saying that this is exactly the same as Erin Hills, but it's a very high-quality course, probably the second-best course in the county behind Erin Hills. And you know, we're gonna cause some very bad publicity by even thinking about doing this and by retaining an appraiser. And I just think it's a very bad idea, and I'm going to vote against the whole idea of getting an appraiser involved at all. Thank you.
Supervisor Merton.
I have some question relative to who assesses golf courses. Ours is a tax exempt, I'm assuming, so we are not assessed. But like West Bend Country Club would have an assessment. If we want to look at comparables, look at some of the golf courses in the area to see what they're going for. I can't see going out, just because we had an inquiry, going out right away and finding out, do we know what our golf course is worth so that we're going to have it in mind in case we're going to sell it? Well, in case that isn't a good enough deal, then later on, someone else comes along. Now we're going to do another appraisal to see if our past appraisal was sufficient. And I really can't see the logic to that or the spending of the dollars to do it. So that's my opinion, and I'm not in support of it.
Supervisor Bossert.
All right, so I'm going to be a no vote on this. We're representatives of the people who elected us. And I've had a couple people who kind of think we should get out of the golf business who live in my district, but I've had a lot of neighbors flat out say that it would be terrible to the families if we sold the golf course. So I'm going to be a no. I think long-term, though, we do need to work with the families to resolve the core problem here, which isn't just that we're in the golf business, but that we have a wonderful golf course that charges such a low rate that it disrupts the market. It's like having an airline that has rates below coach fare for first-class seats on the whole airplane. It throws everything out of whack. We're going to have pressure from competitors to sell until we resolve this. So I hope that the families will see that as well and think, is there a way we can preserve this legacy and at the same time end this market disruption, which will end this question? Because until we end that market disruption, this is going to keep coming up. Thank you.
Supervisor Kist.
In 1969, I think it was that year, a gentleman come before this board. He had a check for $350 million in his pocket. He wanted to give it to the county to build a golf course. And guess what we said? Take your money and go home. Didn't want it. Well, the administrator for the parks was able to convince him to buy a piece of property over in the Hartford area, which is now where the golf course is. And a couple of years later, he came in with the idea that there was a group from Illinois that would come and they would build a golf course on our site. It wouldn't cost the county anything, and they would collect a little revenue on it. At that point, 3 of the big millionaires from Washington County stepped up to the plate and said, that's not the way it's going to happen. We want that course developed by Washington County, run by Washington County employees, and be a Washington County golf course. And that's how it has turned out.
Roger, did you say 1969? That was the first time?
I think that's when Walter Mollison came and he offered it, and they turned it down. They didn't
The
want
very
it.
first time was 1969.
I think that was, yeah.
So I was wrong, this is 50 years old.
I started with the county in 1967, so that's, and I know it's about 2 years later. There was.
You haven't aged a bit.
No.
Thank you.
So- But my point is that we need to keep that in mind, that several people donated a lot of money to that golf course. And I have no idea whether we should sell it or not. I'm not going to, I would vote against selling it. But if the board here decides they want to sell it, so be it, then it'll be sold. But it was a jewel, and the reason it's there is because there was some progressive thinkers that lived here in Washington County and decided they wanted that golf course.
Thanks.
That's it. Thanks.
Thanks, Roger.
And I just want to mention, since you brought that up, the two key individuals that wanted it to be the county-owned and county-run were Mr. Rolfs and Mr. Ziegler, and those are the two families we started with.
Supervisor Basil.
Yeah, since we're doing history with Supervisor Kirst, when I got on the board in 2010, I spent 5.5 hours at the Parks and Planning. Went through the minutes from 1994, 5 to 2000. In the first 3 years, it's amazing, the first 3 years, the Parks and Planning at that time was called, they always talked about the wishes of what the family wanted, what they wanted. You know what, in year 4, their names weren't even mentioned anymore. I'm disappointed that if that is not the golf course that was supposed to be out there. It was supposed to be a family golf course. It was supposed to be cheap. There was supposed to be no alcohol out there, no leagues, no outings. It was supposed to be basically first come, first served, gets to go golfing. So I'm kind of disappointed that now they're worried about the legacy, but when it was all going on and the county board was kind of sleeping as it got to be bigger and bigger and the best, and weren't paying attention to what was going on out there, now all of a sudden they're a little worried about it. I'm sorry, that's not what that course was set up for originally. Like I said, I spent 5.5 hours. If you want some literature and some history, go over there. I'm sure they'll be really happy. I'll let you read through the books.
Thanks. Supervisor Dice.
Thank you. If we were voting tonight on the golf course, I would vote no to sell it. And I'm in complete agreement with the comments I've heard from others. I know these two families, I know what they've given to this community, and I think, in my heart of hearts, I believe we need to respect that donation. And if you say no to people like that now, what does that say to others in the county that want to donate at some point? They're going to step back and say, well, we could do that, but you never know what the county's going to do. You give them one thing and then they turn around and do something else with it, which is what we had intended. But I feel good about the comments that I've heard here tonight, to the point that even though my initial reaction was to vote for an appraisal, thinking that the more information we have, the better decision we can make. But now, all the comments I'm hearing are against even going with the appraisal. So I think in this instance, I will change my vote, and I won't vote for the appraisal either. Because if this can kill it here tonight, that would be fine with me. I haven't heard any opposing views to that, so thank you.
Thank you. Supervisor Gunnery.
Yes, thank you. One last thing. Going forward, I hope whoever's here, anybody wants to give land, give anything here that's going to be stationary like land is, that it's for perpetuity, forever. And it states it right in the agreement, so that we don't have to, or our successors don't have to keep on going and hitting the thing over and over and over again. I mean, these people gave from their hearts, whether it was because of their grandpa, uncle, wife, whatever, they gave. And now we're, doing the opposite. So I think that should be in there, into a legal document somehow, that it's forever held by the county. Thank you.
Supervisor Hartwig.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've been listening to all these individuals tonight, and Mr. Gonring is right. I think it wouldn't be a very good idea. Down the road, like Chris said, down the road, who would want to even give some property to the county if we do stuff like this? So I'm going to be voting no on it.
Okay, seeing no other comments, no further discussion, I'll entertain a motion to allocate $4,500 for a appraisal of the golf course. Supervisor Basil, second by Supervisor Jenkins. Any further discussion? We're going to vote electronically on this. Okay. Brock? Motion fails. 19-6, okay? Next meeting date will be Wednesday, January 9th, 2018, 6 o'clock PM. Entertain a motion to adjourn. Supervisor Bertram, Supervisor Kist. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? We stand adjourned. Thank you, everybody.